Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition.
It's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family.
Regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Darkness was our guide. It's only in your head you feel left out, looked down on. Just try your best, try everything you can. Don't you worry what they tell themselves when you're away. It just takes some time, little girl, you're in the middle of the ride. Everything will be just fine. Everything will be alright, alright. Hey, you know they're all the same. You know you're doing better on your own, so don't buy it. Live right now, just be yourself. It doesn't matter if it's good enough for someone else. It just takes some time, little girl, you're in the middle of the ride. Everything will be just fine. Everything will be alright, alright. It just takes some time, little girl, you're in the middle of the ride. Everything will be just fine. Everything will be alright, alright. Just do your best, try everything you can. Don't you worry what the bitter hearts are gonna say. It just takes some time, you're in the middle of the ride. Everything will be just fine. It just takes some time, little girl, you're in the middle of the ride. Everything will be just fine. Everything will be alright, alright. It just takes some time, you're in the middle of the ride. Everything will be just fine. Everything will be alright, alright.
Good morning, Crosspointe fam. It is good to gather with you virtually on this Sunday morning, and we want to encourage you to stay connected to this community. And there are a lot of ways that you can do that. For example, next Sunday we will officially celebrate Move Up for all of our school-age students from kindergarten through 12th grade. Now, we realize that for many of our students in virtual world, not a whole lot is going to change. But for our kindergartners, 6th graders, and freshmen, this is a really big deal. We've planned some special things for students and their parents as they transition into elementary, middle, and high school. Many of those things are actually happening today because while we realize that next Sunday officially marks Move Up, next Sunday is also the day before school starts. And we suspect that you will probably be doing those last-minute preparations for the start of the new school year. So, you can find all of the details about our parent and student events for our transitional years at crosspoint.org/moveup. Now, immediately after this service is one of those events. Our children's ministry team has planned a super fun kindergarten drive-by for all of our kindergarten families. So if you are the parent of a kindergarten student, you want to make sure that you go directly to Crosspointe right after this to participate in that because you don't want to miss it. Parents, we also realize that some of you may have made the decision to delay the start of kindergarten, particularly because of our current circumstances. And so if that applies to you, would you just send us an email to let us know at kids@crosspoint.org? And that might not seem all that important right now, but it does impact how we communicate with families, so that would be really helpful. We also have big things planned for our older students. Today we are hosting parent kickstart sessions for parents of 6th graders and freshmen. And parents, we just encourage you to come hear all about student ministry and to connect with other parents who have kids that are also starting middle and high school. Also, tonight we are hosting our freshman welcome for students, and Wednesday night, our students that are transitioning into middle school can join us for 6th grade team challenge. Those are both going to be fun, informative events, so students, we hope to see you there. Also, with the start of the school year, we will be kicking off life groups for middle and high school students. Life groups will begin on August 23rd, but you'll want to go ahead and sign up now so that your leader can be in touch with you ahead of time. Signing up is only going to take a minute, and you can find the link on the middle and high school website, or you could find it in the middle and high school e-news. And students, I cannot encourage you enough to get plugged into a life group. Your life group is that supportive community where we grow in our faith and we talk about things that are important. We ask the hard questions, and it's where we learn to trust God in our very real day-to-day quarantined online learning lives. And so I really encourage you to take advantage of the opportunity to connect with your life group. We are also looking for a few good men to lead middle school guys' life groups. If you are a man who has a heart for mentoring the next generation of young men while they grow in their faith, we would love to have a conversation with you about leading one of these middle school guys' life groups. This is an incredible opportunity to make a significant impact on our students as you support and guide them during these critical years. It's also really fun. So if you're interested and you're open to a conversation, please contact me at students@crosspoint.org. Also, we're looking for a few more individuals or couples who are willing to facilitate virtual adult life groups, and those will launch in September. So if you'd like more information about that, you can contact Tirza at community@crosspoint.org. There are so many ways that you can participate in this community. Another way to participate is to contribute financially. And you can do that through stocks, through PayPal, through mail-in checks, through debit cards. To do that, you're going to want to go to crosspoint.org/contribute, or you can text crosspointenc to 77977. And when you do that, a link will be sent to your phone. You just click on that and you can give however you choose. We are so grateful for the way that this community is able to be a light, not only to each other, but to the broader community. Crosspoint, thank you for the ways that you continue to show up and to love and to put God's heart on display.
People say, what is the sense of our small effort? They cannot see that we must lay one brick at a time. Take one step at a time. A pebble cast into a pond causes ripples that spread in all directions. Each one of our thoughts, words, and deeds is like that.
Hey Crosspointe, thanks for being here this morning. So my family really loves being outside. We love camping and hiking and all of those things. And one of the things that we like about that is water. So whether that's the beach or a lake or a creek even, that's something that my kids love to be around and are drawn to. And one of the things that they love to do is to find a rock a small one, but preferably a really big one that they can throw in the water and see what size splash they can make. They love to hear and the sound of that like thunk sound that comes up, and they love to try to guess how deep the water is. It's also really fun for them to try to get somebody on the dry land wet. It's always more fun for the person who stays dry and who's throwing the rock, but that's something else they like to do. We also love as a family to try to do skipping rocks. When you find a rock and you throw it out there, see how many ripples you can get, see how many skips you can get. And it does seem like no matter how many times you throw a rock into the water, it's always different, even if it's just the slightest little bit. And I learned something this week about water molecules. And if you took a science class in high school or middle school, or if you've done any reading at all, you probably already know that the whole entire world is made up of molecules. And molecules are made up of atoms. And the way that water is connected is through hydrogen and oxygen combined together to make a water molecule. Normally, a molecule will go outward when it's hit by something. So for example, if we were to throw a rock into dirt, the dirt would move to accommodate the space of the rock. Or if you were to throw it into sand, it would do the same thing. Or even chocolate pudding, whatever it is, anything beside a liquid, it's going to move out. But what a water molecule does, because of the way that it's put together, it actually moves up and down. And it actually drags the other water molecules with it. So when you throw a stone into the water, what it does is it moves takes the water molecules up, and then when it comes back down, it drags those water molecules down. And that's what recreates this ripple effect. You might also think about this in a sports context, like if you were to go to a stadium, if you remember what those are like. That's when you go to a sporting event and you're sitting in the stands and somebody maybe does the wave and the person next to them stands up and does the wave, and it goes all the way around the entire stadium, maybe a couple of times until somebody's tired of that. But you're kind of pulling those around you into a wave. And so water rippling, this ripple effect, has been used as an illustration for how things are interconnected and how what we do matters for a lot of different things. But I think there's one great story in the Hebrew Bible, what we would call the Old Testament, that really illustrates this really well. It's the story of Ruth. And Ruth is only 4 chapters long, so if you need something to do, you can look it up, read 4 chapters. It won't take you long. It's a great story. And it's the story about Ruth, and you could argue that it's also a story about her mother-in-law, Naomi. And the story begins in Israel, pre-monarchy Israel. So this is before they had kings. And Naomi and her husband and their 2 sons moved to a new country. They moved out of Judah into Moab because there was a famine that was ravaging Israel and Judah at that time, and there just wasn't a lot of supplies. So when they went, after they moved, unfortunately, Naomi's husband died, and her sons took responsibility for her, as was the custom during that time. And then both sons went on to marry women from Moab, Moabite women. And Naomi and her 2 sons and both of their wives, her daughters-in-law, lived happily together in Moab for about 10 years. And then Naomi's sons die. And so this family that Naomi has is now just her and her 2 daughter-in-laws. And the women found themselves in a really serious dilemma because they didn't have any male figures to take care of them. That was the custom during that time. There were no children in the family to tie them to one another. The women became really isolated because of their husband's death. They had no income, and they were basically just desolate. Naomi had no way of supporting herself, and definitely not a way of supporting herself and her two other women. And so by the time this happens, Naomi's home country, Judah, the famine is over and things are fine. And she decided that the best thing for her to do was to move back to Judah. So she decides to return. She had no way of knowing what would happen when she returned there. And the daughters-in-laws, she encourages them to go back to their families because this will be the best thing for them. They're under no legal obligation. There's no customary requirement for them to remain with her. And to be honest, they likely were married very young and are still considered marriable age. and that was likely the best outcome for their lives at that time. That was considered a successful woman's life, to be married and have children, particularly sons. So she tells them, leave, go home. She gives them all kinds of reasons why they should not go with her. And one of the daughters-in-law chooses to listen to Naomi, and she's weeping and she's crying because she loves Naomi, and she leaves and goes back to her family. But the other daughter-in-law, who we know as Ruth, chooses to stay. She doesn't listen to Naomi. She doesn't listen to the advice of her mother-in-law to return. And instead, she tells Naomi this. It's really beautiful, found in Ruth chapter 1. Do not press me to leave you or turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There I will be buried. May the Lord do thus, and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you. When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. It's a really beautiful passage. And the language here is this language of commitment. It's almost like a marriage vow. And in fact, this language, this passage is used in some marriage vows. The language here of Ruth says to Naomi, don't press me to leave you, means more than just at the surface. It means don't ask me to change my allegiances. I am committed to you. And the language here in English, when we have where you lodge, I will lodge, we've actually added an English clause here. We've added a future clause to say, where you lodge, I will lodge. Your God will be my God. But in Hebrew, there's no clause here. It is simply like an equal sign between those two words. Where you go, I go. Where you lodge, I lodge. Your God, my God. And what this really tells us about the story is that Ruth has already committed herself completely to Naomi, to taking care of her. She's chosen Naomi, whatever that means. And the text tells us, when you go a little bit farther, that Naomi says, okay. She stops arguing with Ruth about returning home. And the wording that's used here says, Naomi said nothing to her, meaning to Ruth. And it can be understood in two equally acceptable ways. Language differences make it hard to tell the actual meaning of it. But it could be that Naomi simply was accepting the fact that Ruth felt like she was a part of her family, that she was her daughter, that she appreciated Ruth's loyalty to her, and that she just wasn't going to ask her or bother her about it anymore. There's another understanding, however, of the phrase, Naomi said no more to her, is that Naomi gave her the silent treatment, that she just stopped talking to her altogether. She was frustrated, and that Naomi actually didn't want Ruth to go back with her in the first place. And that would have been a really long walk back home, especially for Ruth, if you knew that you weren't wanted by your mother-in-law and by your one traveling companion. It's possible that Naomi didn't want Ruth to come. She was too much of a reminder of the things that she'd lost, her husband and her sons. It's possible that because Ruth was a foreigner, she was from outside of Judah, and people in Judah didn't really like foreigners, particularly Moabites, that Naomi didn't want her there. Ruth also hadn't had any children, which gave her a lesser status. Naomi could have just thought Ruth was way more trouble than she was worth. And the text even shows us that when they actually got back to Judah, that the woman of Judah never actually accepted Ruth for who she was. She is constantly and continually referred to as Ruth the Moabite throughout the text. Just reminding everybody that Ruth wasn't quite one of them. She wasn't really accepted. She was always on the outside, and she didn't really belong. Regardless of whether Naomi wanted Ruth or whether she didn't, it was a really difficult decision for Ruth to have to make about leaving and not going home to her family and sticking with Naomi. It's outside of logic. It's illogical for her to make this choice. Her choice marked a new beginning for her, just like Naomi's did to go back home. It was the start of a brand new story. It was a leaving behind of the past. Naomi didn't promise Ruth anything. They were going to return to Judah as penniless widows. There was no promise for a future. And the writer of Ruth doesn't lead us to believe that Ruth had any expectations of benefiting from this choice that she made. She chose to stay with Naomi, arguably just simply out of love and loyalty. This choice that was arguably the most difficult one. So both women close the store to one story, one way of being, and they step into this new way without any way of knowing what was to come. And just a quick side note, if I can be a little bit subversive, I find it really interesting that the daughter-in-law who returned home, who listened and was obedient to her mother-in-law, was kind of the ideal obedient womanhood model for that time. It's not her story that we have in our biblical canon. Instead, it's Ruth's story, this story of the woman who chose not to listen to her mother-in-law, her authority at that time, who chose to kind of break the rules, so to speak. It's Ruth who's remembered. So just like Naomi and Ruth, we get to start determining our stories today. We decide the rocks that we throw into the water, even if we never know what ripples look like on the other side. Ruth made the choice to go with Naomi because it was the good choice, not because it would benefit her personally. That wasn't even part of the choice. There's this really interesting passage in the book of Ecclesiastes. The book of Ecclesiastes was written by King Solomon. King Solomon was one of the first kings of Israel, a son of David. So it was written after the time of Ruth, when there were kings in Israel. King Solomon is known for his wealth. He's known for his wisdom, and he's known for women, for his wives, right? The 3 W's. And the book of Ecclesiastes is really Solomon reflecting on all the things that he's learned. And he gives us this really interesting tie-in verse to Ruth. And it's found in Ecclesiastes 11:1. It says, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for after many days you will get it back." So when you look at this verse literally, it makes absolutely no sense. First off, why would you throw bread into the water? It's a waste of good bread, and it's not a good investment. Secondly, why would you go pick up your bread after a couple days? Who wants soggy bread? So either way, this whole entire idea is a little bit ridiculous. It's a bad investment. It's risky. It doesn't make any sense to cast bread on the water and they'll get it a couple days later. This passage seems, though, to be kind of a figure of speech, almost like something that we might say in our culture today, like, don't count your chickens before they hatch, or early bird gets the worm. So those kind of phrases that only make sense in a cultural context. And from archaeologists and anthropologists and other texts, this seems to be coming and is a direct parallel to some Egyptian texts, whose meaning is basically akin to this idea that you choose to do something that is right, even if it doesn't benefit you, and even if you don't know the results of your action. So to cast one's bread upon the water means to give up, to surrender the expectation of personal benefit, to make the better choice without any ulterior motive, simply because it's the right thing to do, the kind thing to do, not because it's easier, not because we'll get something from it. And ultimately, if you look at it in a broader perspective, the benefit is for the broader world, and we benefit from it anyway because we're part of humanity, and therefore when humanity benefits, we do as well. But this idea of casting your bread upon the water is this letting go of the responsibility of seeing results, and instead just doing what's right because it's the right thing to do. Your bread may sink to the bottom of the lake, the ducks may eat the lake, or you may find your bread on the other side of the lake tomorrow. You can't know when you cast your bread into the lake what's going to happen. And you seeing the results at the end isn't the point anyway. The point is the good action. So Ruth's story is kind of this, her casting her bread upon the water, her choosing to be with Naomi wasn't for her own personal benefit. And this is also the type of story and the type of life that we're told to live. This is choosing not to believe the I. This is when we, like Ruth, choose what type of story we want to write for ourselves. This is choosing to throw our pebbles into the lake, regardless of how far we're guaranteed to see the ripples. It's simply trusting that there will be ripples. So there's a similar idea that you've probably heard of. It's a pretty popular, it's all throughout popular culture. And it's the idea of the butterfly effect, right? The butterfly effect was considered by scientists some years ago, theorized, and the basic idea is that all things are connected. So the way that it's explained is that there's a butterfly that flaps its wings in, say, Brazil, and that creates a wind, and the wind eventually creates waves, and the waves create a storm. And so eventually from this butterfly wings in one part of the world, there's a tsunami or a storm in the other part of the world. And one could argue that this is something that happens all the time, that if you look back throughout history and throughout current events, that's something that happens on a continual basis. You could say that it's happening right now within our Black Lives Matter movement and the protests that the death of George Floyd sparked. One particular thing, Black Lives Matter, protests around the world and then around our country, and now there's laws that are hoping to be changed and things like that. So this effect, one thing, the effect changes everything in the end. So this is also true within something called like butterfly politics, how that changes. One thing leads to another, something triggers something else, and eventually changes are made. And one idea of this is this, you can see this butterfly effect played out in modern history, was through these revolutionary wave of pro-democracy demonstrations and protests in the Middle East and North Africa between 2010 and 2012, which we now refer to as the Arab Spring. So this didn't start out as something somebody said, today's the day we start Arab Spring. It didn't start that way at all. It started with something small. And it began in December 2010 when an ordinary man from Tunisia, a street vendor, set himself on fire in a personal protest against the government seizing his vegetable cart, seemingly arbitrarily because he lacked a permit. And the seizure of carts wasn't being applied equally, and he did this as a personal protest. Now, he was making a statement, of course, but he wasn't setting out to create a worldwide or a movement in his area. But his actions sparked protests within Tunisia. And ultimately, the leader of Tunisia fled to Saudi Arabia, and that led to an entire regime change in that country. And then activists in nearby countries were inspired by the events of Tunisia. And their outcome, most noticeably in Egypt, was that other people began protesting and changing their governments. And Egypt, in particular, used social media. And we know how social media can snowball. They used it to expand the movement, to tell protesters where to come, to inform the world of what was going on, and people began watching and paying attention. And this spread to Syria and to Libya and to Yemen with varying degrees of success. But it was all because one person's personal decision and sacrifice changed the entire landscape of countries, something that he never really set out to do. So another maybe closer to home way to look at this is this. So it has been a record-breaking hot summer. It has been the hottest part of the summer for us was when our air conditioning broke. And honestly, I don't think I've ever been more thankful to anyone on the planet than the gentleman that fixed our air conditioning. That might be a slight exaggeration, but it definitely felt that way at the moment. But my question is, I'm so thankful for my air conditioning, as I'm sure you are as well. But should I have really been thanking my wonderful air conditioning repairman? Should I have instead thanked James Harrison, who was a man from Australia who invented the mechanical ice making machine in order to keep meat from spoiling and actually to keep beer cold? He he invented the mechanical ice machine, which helped move the invention of the air conditioning and, quite frankly, refrigeration forward. Maybe I should thank him. Or maybe instead I should thank John Gorey, who figured out how to make ice in the first place. And he used it to cool the rooms of his hospital to help his patients. Or we could go a step further and say that I should really be thanking Benjamin Franklin and James Hadley, who discovered that evaporation of certain liquids could cool an object quickly, including a person. So the answer is, yeah, I should be thanking all of these individuals, all of these people, and probably countless other unnamed people for ensuring that I had comfort on a hot North Carolina summer day. All of them should be thanked. Our choices matter. Great things, major changes, even revolutions begin in ordinary spaces. And most of the time, just by ordinary people simply choosing to live a different story, simply choosing to make a better choice, to do what's right, despite of or in spite of how they might benefit from it. What we do and the choices we make ultimately matter, no matter how small or insignificant or invisible they might seem, because we have no way of knowing the ripples that our choices and our actions might make. We can rest assured, though, that they do make a difference. Good or bad, they're going to make some sort of difference. And most of the time, the world is just made better by people who simply do what is best, who simply choose to do what is best with themselves not at the center of the equation. Thinking about other people, the planet, fellow humanity as they make a choice. And it's easy, I think, to think, especially in our current COVID context of isolation, that what we do doesn't really matter, right? It doesn't matter what businesses I support. It doesn't matter if I commit to lead a small group for middle school or not. It doesn't matter if I wear a mask. It doesn't matter what I eat. It doesn't matter if I write a scathing review about that person. It doesn't matter if I respond hatefully to a post. My tone of voice doesn't matter. My commitment doesn't matter. Me talking to my boss or encouraging a friend or a coworker or writing a note, it doesn't matter. But ultimately, those are the only things that matter. Those small choices lead to bigger stories. And I want to acknowledge just for a minute that this line of thinking could put us in a dangerous spot, or at least a terrifying spot, because we run the risk of, number one, thinking of ourselves more highly than we should, or thinking of ourselves as less than we should. And that's not the point at all. We also run the risk of being paralyzed with anxiety about every single choice that we make, because it does have a ripple effect. And the intent's not to paralyze us or to keep us from making decisions. Rather, it's just to remind us that our choices aren't made in a vacuum. That I are not the center of the universe, and our personal choices have ripples. Our choices, the stories that we're creating, need to be examined. How are my decisions? How is my life and my story potentially affecting other people? And what type of person am I becoming because of them? We have to decide what we want to choose. It's our choice whether to allow our lives and our choices to transform us or not. We will choose differently when we keep that in mind. And at the very least, choices, whether we ever see them transforming somebody else or not, they will transform us. They will revolutionize us if we allow them to. Our choices make not only our story, but ultimately contribute to the stories of others too. Ruth, that pesky daughter-in-law who made an illogical, unorthodox choice to stay with Naomi, was at the beginning of something that actually led to the world changing, that led to a revolution. She had no way of knowing it at the time. And it wouldn't happen until long after she was dead and generations later. But Ruth's choice ultimately changed history because she was the great-great-great-great-great-grandmother of Jesus, who is why we're here today. So most of the time, It's the accumulation of all the good small things that create a good story, that have positive ripples. Continually choosing small good things makes the biggest difference. And the ripples that makes are felt in ways that we'll never know, but they do matter. So I want to take just a minute for us to have some personal reflection time on this. It's nothing really formal, just a time to turn inward and kind of examine where we are and give us some time to think about this a little bit. So we're going to take just a few moments for us to get comfortable, to close our eyes, and then I'll close us in prayer. And I'm going to read a couple statements, and I want you to just think them through as I say them out loud. Think about if it's an area in your life that needs to be thought of more deeply, a different way of change, or if it's something that you need to hold on to and then let go. So let's close our eyes and think for a moment. What happens when we choose to speak up for justice over personal comfort? Whose lives does that change? Choosing wonder over judgment. Choosing encouragement before critique. How does that change the conversation? Choosing inclusion rather than exclusion. How might that broaden our view of God? And who does that empower? Choosing a new way to shop that encourages fair pay and work practices. How many lives might that change? Choosing the way that may be harder, but that you know is better. What ripple might that have? Choosing sustainable practices that ensure a healthy world for the future. What ripple might that have? Choosing to be kind to ourselves. Choosing to give the benefit of the doubt rather than rushing to judgment. Whose life might that change? Choosing community instead of isolation. Choosing to listen rather than to be heard. What relationship might that change? People say, what is the sense of our small effort? They cannot see that we must lay one brick at a time, take one step at a time. A pebble cast into a pond causes ripples that spread in all directions. Each one of our thoughts, words, and deeds is like that. Dorothy Day. God, be with us as we go. May we make ripples that are positive. May we be people who try to look more like you and who seek to love above all else. Amen.
Thank you for joining us today, and welcome home. If you are in need of assistance during this crisis, please reach out at crosspoint.org/help.